Hey there, Dan Garner, strength coach and nutrition specialist here, coming at you from Fight Camp Conditioning. Today, I want to make a video on 5 different tips that you can use to help you cut weight a little bit more intelligently. A lot of athletes are confused about the weight cutting game, and rightfully so. There's a lot of science behind it, but there's also a lot of art behind it. Experience is a factor when it comes to weight cutting, and I've worked with a lot of athletes in a lot of different fight sports at the top of the absolute world. So I want to offer you 5 different tips today that you can use to help better navigate your next weight cut. The first tip that I want to offer you is gather some data. Some fighters, they just don't realize how important data is. But there's 3 points of data that you could use to make your next weight cut so much more successful. Data point gathering number 1 is do a test weight cut. A lot of athletes never enter this in their mind, but it is totally fine and actually encouraged to do a mini weight cut about 16 weeks out from your next competition. If you do a mini test weight cut, you're able to see how your body's responding to the weight cut. You're able to see if this is the right weight class for you. You're able to determine your preferred method for weight loss. Is it going to be sauna? Is it going to be steam room? Is it going to be put on the tracksuit, get on the treadmill with a bunch of sweat sweat all over you? There's going to be all kinds of different methods, and to each his own, especially when it comes to weight cutting. But when you do a test cut, you're able to determine all of these different things, and that is valuable data, because let me tell you something. The last thing that you want to be 1 week out from the fight is nervous. When you have nervous and anxiety feelings about the weight cut, you're missing the point. You should be focused on the strategy at which you need to win and not focused on the diet. Okay, I get frustrated sometimes with fighters. It's almost as if weight cutting was the win. It's like once they step on the scale, they do their flex, they're good to go. It's like, no, you still gotta fight, man. I know you've been focusing on cutting weight for so long, but the actual competition comes tomorrow. So when you do a test weight cut, you are able to eliminate the feelings of nervousness, eliminate the feelings of anxiety surrounding the nutrition aspect of the game. So you can put all of your energy into what matters most, and that is your performance. So first piece of data that you could possibly get is a test weight cut, and the closest I would ever do this to competition is 16 weeks out. So there's a smart way to do things and a dumb way to do things. Don't do a test weight cut 1 month out. Your body's not going to want to do 2 weight cuts back to back that close. So test weight cut 16 weeks out, that's number 1 piece of data. Number 2 piece of data that I'd want you to have is to calculate your night sweat rate. A lot of us always lose at least 1 to even 3 pounds at night just simply due to dehydration and electrolyte loss. So you can use this as a predictive value when cutting weight to be a little bit more intelligent about your approach. A lot of athletes actually cut too much weight. They'll cut all kinds of weight on Thursday, and let's say your weigh-in is on Friday, and then on Friday they're actually under their weight class, and that's because they didn't factor in their night sweat rate. But you can factor in your night sweat rate Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and factor that in to the calculation, because you know you're going to lose some amount of weight guaranteed, independent of the sauna, independent of the steam room, independent of your running, or independent of your diet. Night sweat loss rates are an independent factor towards your ability to make or not make weight. So knowing your own night sweat loss rate is another valuable piece of data that you could use and factor in to the predictive values of when you know you're going to be on weight, because you only want to be on weight for as minimal amount of time as possible. So it's likely best to surf in, make weight, and get out of there. And you can do this a lot more effectively if you have more predictive values that you can use to know what weight you're going to be at what time because of the previous data that you've pulled from yourself. Okay, so calculate your night sweat loss rate on an approximate value. The third piece of data that I would want you to have in this first tip is that you should define your preferred method for weight cutting. Why? Because a lot of athletes are so different. Like I said, some prefer steam room, some prefer sauna, some prefer getting on the treadmill with a rubber suit on. Some prefer a lot of different methods. There's a lot of different ways to go about this thing. Salt baths, you name it, towels. I've seen everything in this game, but everybody has a preferred method. And if it's your first time ever cutting weight, or if you've only ever cut weight one way before because that's the way your coach told you to do it, you might be better off trying something else. Everybody's so different when it comes to these weight cutting responses from their bodies. So get a piece of bio data on yourself that objectively defines why it is your preferred method. Maybe you lose only 1 pound per unit of time in the steam room, but you lose 2 pounds per unit of time in the sauna. Everybody is so different, okay? So tip number one, believe it or not, that was one tip. Tip number one is to collect data. We want to get a test weight cut, we want to get our night sweat rate, and we would also like to get your preferred method. That's tip number one. Tip number two is no high intensity training sessions the week of weigh-ins. So if you're already cutting weight the week of weigh-ins, the last thing you want to do is train really hard. And I know this can be tempting and somewhat counterintuitive because some athletes want to train really hard right up to the fight because they have anxiety and they have to get rid of these feelings of anxiety out of their body. But it's a self-defeating tactic because what we know from the literature is that inflammation retains water within the body. So if we create muscular inflammation or joint inflammation in the form of high intensity training in fight week, then you're actually shooting yourself in the foot because you're causing water retention when you're supposed to be trying to get water loss at the same time. So if you need to include some additional training to support your weight cutting efforts, ensure it's aerobic. Ideally some sort of aerobic circuit, something very low impact on your joints so that you're still going into your fight in optimal health, but you're doing the training modalities that are actually supporting your weight loss efforts and not negating your weight loss efforts. So that's number two. Keep it light, keep it low intensity if you're ever going to utilize some form of training the week before your fight. Tip number three is there's a big difference between cutting weight and cutting fat. You want to be somebody who cuts fat for as long as possible before you have to cut weight. Weight class it causes a big issue, right? Dehydration is not healthy for a number of reasons. That's why I said previously, you want to be at your weight for as little amount of time as possible before getting your rehydration and refueling protocol, because those are two different things, before getting those on check so that you can get back to your healthy homeostatic weight level where everything is optimal from a health-based perspective and from a performance-based perspective as well. But you want to be very lean. You gotta be very lean, okay? For a couple of reasons. Number one, being lean is just the low-hanging fruit of making your weight. You shouldn't be somebody who's overweight and then trying to make a lower weight class because you're not in the right weight class in that sense, or you just need to increase your discipline in this area because if you're holding a lot of body fat, your opponent's going to have more muscle than you, your opponent's going to be stronger than you, and it hurts you because of reason number two, and that's the hydration levels of body fat. Muscle is 75% water, whereas fat is less than 25% water. So when you actually have muscle tissue and you're lean, you can actually cut more weight when you have more muscle tissue and not less weight. A lot of people for some reason think that if they look more overweight, then they have more to cut. No, you have more fat to lose. You don't have more weight to cut. Those are two different things. But the muscular guy who's lean, he has not fat to lose, but he has weight to cut because of the hydration variations in those tissue differences between fat tissue and muscle tissue. So that's tip number three. You should be as lean as possible before you ever start cutting weight. And if you're not lean, that's inexcusable. You should be lean as possible before you ever start cutting weight for your combat sports. Tip number four is you cannot go crazy if you have a weigh-in, if you do not have a 24-hour competition distance. So if you're weighing in at 9 p.m. and then you compete the next day at 9 p.m., you've got a lot more flexibility with how much weight you can cut, depending upon how good your rehydration and refueling protocol that is. But if you're somebody who competes within 3 hours of weighing in, the max you should ever cut is 3 to 4 pounds. And that's an excellent rule to stick with. If you're competing within 3 hours, the max weight you should ever cut is 3 to 4 pounds, okay? You can't ever go crazy. I've seen too many guys who are better than they showed themselves to be in competition. Their preparation didn't meet their expression out in the mat because they cut too much weight and they tried to rehydrate too soon because they were competing within 3 hours at a jiu-jitsu tournament. Physiology doesn't work this way. So 3 to 4 pounds max is ideally best for performance outputs if you have a very short period of time. That's tip number 4. Tip number 5 for weight cutting is be prepared. When your job depends on you fighting, being dehydrated, and being really hungry, preparation goes a long way. Fighting dehydration and hunger is every bit of an animalistic state as you could possibly create in modern times. So be prepared. bring your towel, bring your water, bring all of your supplementation that's required for your refueling and rehydration protocol. Get all of your time slots in check. Already have checked into your room or check into your flight. Have your meals prepped in advance. Know what gym you're going to go to. All of this stuff, all of it, and I mean all of it, should be taken care of. You want to take the fatigue of decision making out of the process because it is fatiguing at that time. And you want to minimize any percentage chance of stress that you could possibly have because your physiology is under enough stress already and your psychology is also under enough stress already. So be prepared for absolutely everything. And that's a wrap, guys. Tip number 1, collect as much data as you can. Ideally in the form of a test cut, a night sweat loss rate, and with your preferred method. Tip number 2, no high intensity training the week of your weight cut. Tip number 3, there's a big difference between cutting weight and dropping body fat. Tip number 4, don't ever go crazy with weight cutting, especially if you are competing within 3 hours of your weigh-in. And tip number 5, be as prepared as possible. This is Dan Garner checking in from Fight Camp Conditioning, and those are your 5 weight cutting tips.